Hey everybody, welcome to Predictable Revenue Live. I'm your host Colin Stewart, and today I'm joined by Jay Mount. He's the founder CEO over at Basix.ai, not Basix like I initially thought. Today we are talking about basically sales enablement and what you can be doing to increase your sales productivity. We got some pretty cool stuff coming up. Basically, we're going to start by leading off. Why is it relevant? Why should you specialize your sales roles? How do you manage the process? And why Jay thinks the most important thing to do is to get back to basics. So that being said, Jay, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Colin. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited. Let's just give everybody a minute to jump in here. I see a bunch of the regulars. Hey, everybody. Let me know what you're hoping to learn from Jay. Jay, I see you've got, looks like your YouTube channel, your marketing people hanging out. So why don't you say, hey, I'm guessing they're in Toronto area as well.
Definitely. Hey everyone from Basics.
What's up?
It's
Hey,
probably DJ, a few others.
hey DJ. Hey Sandra, how's everybody doing today? Let me know as you're jumping in, what is it that you want to learn? What do you want to see? What's up, Caesar? It's Gucci, buddy. What do you want to learn from Jay today? So with that being said, talk to me a little bit about, like we talk a lot about sort of the sales stack, but there's sort of and I think one of the biggest problems that a ton of companies make is they see that, hey, there's a problem, right? I've got a challenge with demand gen. I need more meetings. I need more X. And the easiest thing to do is to spend some money. Whether it's like I'm out of shape, I'm gonna buy a nicer bike, or I'm gonna buy a Zwift Smart Trainer. The easiest thing to do is spend money because it's just one like click on Amazon or the gym or whatever, and you sign up for the gym. But it's sort of like the gym membership. If you buy it but you don't use it, you're not gonna get the desired effect. And I see this with not just sales, but sort of I'd say a lot of the purchase decisions that companies try and make, including our own, including myself. And it doesn't really matter if you don't use it. And it's not necessarily about the tool, it's about how you use it and all the soft stuff that goes into it. So talk to me a little bit about why like sales productivity is important, why this solves it. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's completely normal. You're right. We all do it. The easiest way to optimize is to look outside of ourselves. I'm just going to pull these tools towards me and they're going to make me better. But ultimately it's about using it, and it's about, getting better at it and getting better at whatever you're trying to do with it, most importantly. And so sales productivity for me is tying all of the elements of the actual sales process together. At the end of the day, it's all going to come down to productivity. You might have great lead gen, you might have a great toolkit to work with, you might be really great with customers, but unless you tie those elements together, it's not going to get you the result you're looking for.
Gotcha. And so just maybe if we step up a level, what's your definition of sales productivity?
Um, Results at the end of the day. So being able to execute and get to that end result.
Nice. And so everything basically, I guess I've been sort of working on our formula lately, and it's like if I zoom in on this, it's sort of like the execution layer of like the management, and maybe not execution, but it's like the management layer of like the sales, your sales management, your sales enablement, your sales operations, right team, right people, right priorities. Fair?
Exactly.
Gotcha. And so when we talk about like this all-encompassing piece, why is it so critical? Why is it so important to make sure that you're I guess focusing on this in the first place?
It's throughput, right? Like I know that you're a biker. So if you're doing a long distance bike ride, you don't want to be sprinting from the very beginning, burn yourself out and not be consistent through the whole race. And so the productivity game allows you to remove friction and make sure that you're there for those moments when you're going to get a win and you're not in the wrong place. You're focused on the wrong things.
But it's so much fun to just try and sprint the whole time, but you get a few
It
K in
is.
and you're toast.
Yeah, every time.
Awesome. And so if we look at like one of the pieces that, you mentioned, hey, what's up, Hebran? You mentioned in the pre-interview is that, you want people to keep it simple and not overcomplicate things. So what have you seen when people try and get too fancy here?
Complexity just kills sales half the time, right? So when you're worried about, oh, do I have my cadences configured properly? Do I have all my tools open? Am I staying on top of LinkedIn and my inbox and voicemail box? You're starting to get distracted right there. But we also get in our own heads about the complexity of that sales process. Oh, where am I at? Did I send that last thing to them? And sometimes we even forget to focus on that person in front of us when we actually get them on a call or get them on a meeting with us. And so by streamlining things back and trying to avoid complexity, you're really just freeing yourself to focus on the sale itself.
Mm-hmm. Which I think is I mean, I know you guys build sales tools. We've built sales tools and we build more along the sales team. But if the tool is the focus, then you've gone off the rails.
Definitely.
Yeah. Way too easy. And can you give me an example of maybe like a time when this is like hit you guys or hurt you guys? And it doesn't have to be with your tool specifically. I'm just like a time when you guys got stuck dealing with, or maybe spending too much time focusing on the tool. And I'll ask the same question to chat. What's up, Raymond? What's a tool, or what's something that you implemented or bought that became too much about the tool, or more about the tool than about the customer? So I'll leave chat with that, and then I'll throw it to Jay.
Perfect. For example, the reps at one of our clients had to spend about an hour a day just switching lists to different tools. In this case, I think it was a dialer tool, and they had to pull a list for the early time zones and then pull another list for the later time zones. And then if they were working later, do it again. At the end of the day, it seemed like a small task to each rep, but there was, 80 something reps times
Whoa.
a total of an hour a day times 5 days a week. That adds up to a lot of potential sales time. And so by focusing on that complexity of, I need this tool to have exactly the right list at exactly the right time, you take yourself out of the actual sales process unintentionally.
Totally. It's a funny idea, and I know it's slightly different than what we were planning on talking about, but I see so much research from wherever. Hey, Michael, how are you doing, man? Michael was here last week, and 2 weeks ago, we just destroyed his LinkedIn profile and one of his messages. I'm stoked that you came back. One of the, in a good and hopefully positive, helpful way. One of the things that I look at, and I think a lot of SDRs, and I've been guilty of this as well, especially when I was on the front lines, either selling or prospecting, was like, what's the perfect time of day? What's the perfect day of the week to prospect? And the real answer is, well, I guess before I share my answer, what's your answer? What's the perfect time of day, time of week to prospect?
Time it is right now, when you're excited and bringing energy to that conversation and engaging the person.
Totally. Like it's interesting when you're looking at all these other averages. It's like these are averages of people that are in a variety of different spots. And so in some ways it's insightful and it's useful. In other ways, you got to question, like, is this data even statistically significant? Like, is it really coming from a scientist, or is it coming from the marketing team? And like, we've been as guilty of trying to figure these things out as well. We did a whole thing on Outbound Labs where we were trying to be objective as possible and test. We got some good data in there. I think the one thing it directed me to is just what you said, is the correct time to prospect is right now, is when you're going to be most productive. And if I'm ever asking myself, when is the right time? It's right now. If you're asking yourself that question, is it the right time to prospect? The answer is yes.
Definitely.
So what's some, and I'm hearing some, let me just look at chat here. Michael Cox is saying Outplay has been a massive time suck. Also bring it on. Caesar's playing with the MQL process execution, added an administrative succubus because the manual tasks associated with the trash leads dispositions. Yeah, inbound, if you don't have that tuned, or if you've got a large quantity, can be a big time suck. How, Jay, what are your thoughts on the inbound process there?
Definitely trying to keep an eye on those flow of leads, figuring out which channels are paying off, for one. Two, we always like to make sure that we're also qualifying as much as we can up front and sending them to the right place. So we're not just dumping everything onto our sales team's lap. Totally.
Michael, Caesar, I'm curious, what part of the tool has been the time suck for you? Because maybe we can try and diagnose and help you out here. So yeah, let's go. I'll wait for you guys to get back. I'll throw it back to Jay. When we're talking about sort of keeping things simple, what are some other things people need to keep in mind?
For me, it really comes down to execution. If you're spending time working for your process, if you find yourself spending a ton of time in the tool just to make it work, orchestrating basic repetitive things, you're taking yourself away from the sales process. You're making things complicated. If you're finding that you're spending more time not selling than you are selling, you're probably making things complicated.
Yeah, that's fair. Sort of a different question, but I guess maybe first question, step 0. What size of company in terms of number of people are you guys?
Basics,
Yeah,
20.
gotcha. And do you have a sales ops person yet?
Not yet, no.
Yeah. I'm curious if anybody's got a sales ops person in chat. Let me know at what point did you hire somebody? I think we're right around the 50 or 55 mark. And we do sales enablement, sales development for other companies. And we were probably a little bit late to the game, if I'm honest, in getting a sales ops individual. Because we hired Jordan earlier this year, beginning of the summer, and it was amazing. Now, would I recommend everybody hire a sales operations person? Absolutely not. They are amazing, but they are not they're not needed if you're two people, right? If you've got a team of two, and Ashanti's just asking, is sales ops the same thing as rev ops or different? I'd say like rev ops is the high level category and of like all of revenue, and then sales ops would be one branch, and marketing ops would be another branch, and customer success ops would be another branch, and you might have just like product management operations and the tools, etc. So there's different, like I look at it the way I look at it, revenue, right? There's revenue is the high level category, then there's customer success, product marketing, sales, and account management, if you want to break out your teams that way. And then each of those tools and teams will have a different stack. And so generally when we're talking about sales operations, we're sort of zooming in on the specific stack around sales. And if we're talking about revenue ops, we're talking about all of them in general and how they all stitch together. It can be like, I definitely would recommend anybody that has a couple of tools, a couple of salespeople, you definitely want to be spending some money on sales operations, but I definitely don't think it justifies a full-time hire, because it is a large, they're not like good sales ops people aren't cheap, and they're non-revenue generating. So if you're 10 people and you've got a sales ops person, you're probably a bit top heavy and they're not going to have, enough to do. What's your take, Jay, on sort of the right timing around?
Agreed. I wish there was a formula, but there's that point when you're at a tipping point and the sales team is doing things that aren't sales oriented, or could be given some help to point them in the right direction. And it's that tipping point that's the right time.
Hey, Meryl. Nope. You jumped on, so you
Sorry
got to say
about
hi.
that.
No, you got to say hi. You got to come back and say hi. Chat.
Hey, everyone.
This is Meryl. Everybody wave. I know we can't see you, but you and
Yeah.
Meryl can't see you, but wave. This is the person that makes it all happen behind the scenes. And I basically just get to show up to these and start talking, and Meryl does everything else. It makes my job super easy. It's awesome.
It's true. All I had to do was log on.
Totally. Same. I almost forgot to do that. It's so simple. Got lost in the spreadsheet this morning. There we go. All right, so let's see here. Yeah, Michael was saying, so we're kind of gone off a bit of a tangent on the sales ops side. So we'll come back. Michael, I see your question there. Top line, blah, 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 blah. I just want to make sure I'm not missing. Okay, so let's look at, Michael, you're saying setting up sequences was taking too much time away from actually doing. So I'm curious, was it that you were like testing and iterating, or you guys were you using like templates? Do you have a base template? And so while we're waiting for Michael, I'll throw it to Jay. What are your thoughts on the difference between templating everything? Like, do you guys template everything for, like, I know you have your own tools, so you're probably not working in outreach. Do you have templates for everything, or do you let your reps build their own templates and sequences, or whatever you call them?
Yep. So templates are available throughout the tool for us. And so our philosophy is make them available to everyone, allow it to be collaborative. But then I like to work with the team to figure out what's working best. And, sometimes the email stuff might be better left to someone from our marketing background, and we can pipe those leads into our system, or certain parts are better left to the sales team and they can customize those.
Very cool. Yeah, I'm a big fan of like the core messaging, where like you're giving just outside of your tool, you've got a doc of like, here's the core, here's how we describe things. This is the 30-second elevator pitch. This is how I would write it down. This is the one sentence line. This is how I describe it to my mom.
Yeah.
Like, The longest time, I don't know what your parents are like, but we built an outreach like tool, a basics like tool, in the early days, and trying to describe that to my mom was like, I know she
Yeah.
cared and was interested, but she's like, I don't understand why somebody would use that.
Yeah, for sure. It can get super complicated. It definitely having that core messaging set in place is helpful, right? It gives them those guideposts. It gives them something to work from. It drives consistency. You can iterate and share best practice through that. The only thing I've seen where it kind of goes wrong is people invest in a big playbook, and then when you go and actually talk to their sales rep, they don't even know where to find it. You get that, oh, we have a playbook, and then you have to go looking for it, right?
I have a very, very vivid memory of going to an on-site training back in the day when we could go and see our customers in person. And I was like, hey, so talk to me about your playbook. And they literally opened up their desk, and there was one thing in the bottom drawer, and it was a binder or a duotang that had a bunch of like printed off slides, and it was like a 60-page slide deck. And
Yeah.
it probably didn't, but in my memory, it had dust on it.
For sure. For sure.
Yeah. And so 100%, like if it's going to sit in a desk and not get used, then it doesn't really matter. I mean, it's been building a company. It's been one of the hardest things to learn because maybe I'm a bit slow to the uptake, but learning that I need to write things down. And I can't remember where the quote was or who said it, but basically like a good CEO can explain, will talk and explain, like walk you through like what you need to do. A great CEO will write it down and make it super clear. And I might say like an average CEO can tell you what to do and articulate the strategy, and an amazing, like great CEO will actually like write it down, make it clear.
Sure.
And I think it's the same on the Rev team. If it's not clear, if it's not understood, like if I'm assuming people here are the sales leaders themselves, and so if you're that individual, it's critical not to just send the message, not to understand it. Like step one is understanding the right thing to do intellectually, and then I think step two is making sure that you can communicate that, whatever your primary communication style is. And then step three, which is really the only one that matters, is make sure that message is received on the other side. And there's a whole bunch of stuff sort of in the middle there. But
100%. You have to set the expectation and inspect that it's there, right? Without that follow-up, it's not going to stick. It doesn't stick for any of us without repetition.
Totally. Michael was saying that they were testing and iterating, started from a template. Also, sales success tends to pull me away from sales. Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on your role here. Like if you are an individual contributor, it's way too easy to, and I've been super guilty of this. This is why I knew as a rep, this is why I knew Salesforce so well, because it's so easy to just go in and tinker. It's like, oh, I'm going to do this. Like I got lost in a spreadsheet this morning because I was just tinker. And it's so easy. You make a change, you see an immediate result, right? And it's that like, you get that little dopamine hit. It's like, oh, I did this over here and it moved there and I got it right. You get that little dopamine hit. Whereas from a mental or emotional perspective, cold calling or prospecting or like going through and grinding through your tasks is less, I guess, dopamine rewarding, or is maybe like a little bit more of a bigger mental lift in terms of, how you do it. I'm curious if you see the same thing, just that it's way easier to go and just tinker.
It's way easier. Like you said, you get that instant gratification as you're going, right? We all like that. We're all going to be pulled towards something that's giving us good feedback. But sometimes those other activities are the ones that have the biggest payoff for us, right? And it's about looking for that point where you can see some success in what you're doing. It's not that you just didn't get someone interested. You managed to get someone who wasn't going to help you out of your way, and you're on to the next person who possibly could be that person.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, it comes back to like, when's the right time to prospect? It's now.
Yeah.
Because if you're like, oh, well, no, I'm going to wait for another hour. I'm just going to tinker around in this. I'm going to check my email. I'm going to look at it's honestly, just to go on a tangent, it's one of the reasons why I hate seeing companies mix inbound and outbound, because it's way too easy to just click the refresh button in your email. It's way easier than just going out and looking at a cold list and be like, these people have never heard from me. They don't know anything about me and they don't want to talk to me. Okay, but if I check my inbox, I'm going to get a bunch of people that are like excited to talk to me. They may not be a great fit. They may not be, ready to buy, but at least they want to talk to me. So mentally, it's certainly the easier piece.
It's going to give you that positive feedback a lot more often, right? Which is why we're drawn towards it.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. I just want to follow up on Caesar's here. So he was talking about the MQL process. Top line results can be misleading. So they had a 12% reply rate on 200 emails versus sort of the quality of the responses. The numbers keep the status quo of sequence messaging and eliminate the urgency for A/B testing. Detrimental, especially when results aren't there. Totally agree. So I think where Caesar sounds like you're stuck is the sort of, as you call it, the vanity metric of like that top level 12%. One thing, so I'll throw it to Jay. How would you coach Caesar on, what to do and how to change basically, if I could summarize, it's Caesar's sending a bunch of emails and getting a ton of replies, but there's no pickup there. So what are the things that could be going wrong, and what would you recommend?
Definitely. So there's a few places you can really tweak that, right? Who are you sending those emails to is my first question. And then how are you framing out the value you're going to add in those emails to them? So there's two core parts you can be testing. And if you're not getting the results you need to start to iterate right away, in my opinion, in order to uncover which one of those is the one that needs tweaking.
Totally. I'll go like, I got two pieces that I would talk about. It was like, and kind of similar, which is the high level of if you send 200 emails and you get 12%, 24 replies, and none of those are positive, you're probably you're either emailing the wrong people, or you are you're emailing the right people, but you're not describing your tool effectively. Or you've got some like clickbaity thing and they're replying being like, hey, F off, or like, this is not cool. And the way I would figure out like what is right, because you're right, Caesar, at the end of the day, the overall reply rate doesn't really matter. It's the throughput of like what you're putting into your pipeline. And if you're not booking any meetings, if you're not adding any pipeline or closing any deals, then it's all just a intellectual exercise that's not actually putting any rubber to road. And so I would say one thing that you can do for free that I've done in the past, and it's janky, and it's not something I would recommend doing in the long run, but if you're struggling with an issue like this, I know you can do it in a bunch of different tools. And Jay, maybe you can highlight if you can do this and if this is something that Basix helps with. But basically, what I used to do back in the day, and you can still do it now, is create labels, positive, neutral, negative, in your Gmail. And then go through a sample of the replies. So do a search and look at, there's a way of like, basically if you search for your last message, you can just pull up all of the replies to your last message. And then you have those in a search in Google, and then you just go through one at a time and you label positive, neutral, negative, positive, neutral, negative. And doing 50 will take you a couple of minutes if you do it right.
For sure. When an email comes in Basix and you mark that person with a pipeline stage disqualify or qualify, it actually automatically flows over to templates for us and does that little step for you automatically. So
nice.
Couldn't agree more. We actually built it to work with that.
Nice. That was our biggest, back in the day, that was our biggest like differentiator between Sales Laughter Outreach, is we had built the inbox function. So we recreated Gmail within our own platform. And when you replied, you basically were set with like positive, neutral, negative template blocks or
just positions.
Menus. Exactly. And as soon as you clicked on one and selected a template from there, it automatically applied that. You can create custom rigging in Gmail to do this. So if like we try and keep this like fairly tools agnostics, but Jay is here as part of the marketing function. So shameless plug by Basix. But you can definitely do it for free, right? And all you have to do is create a string in your Gmail, or create a search for, or a filter in Gmail that searches for like a unique block of text in one of your emails, and then you can automatically create that as a label in Gmail. Then you can click on that label. You can go through and apply the positive, neutral, negative labels. So that's where I would go if I was seeing a 12% response rate and not really getting a whole lot of throughput. All right, so I know we got a little distracted there. We did get a question from the list ahead of time, so why don't we jump into that, and then we'll get into the rest of the outline here, because we want to get to like talk about selling and the process and specializing the sales roles and why that's important. But Stephen O, I'm going to call you Steve O. Stephen O, are you on let us know if you're in chat and if there's something specific. But Steve O's question was, how do you help your team when you're working from home from a sales productivity perspective?
It's a good question. We've actually had a great opportunity to work with a bunch of our customers on that part. So I've got to see how a bunch of different people are handling it in 2020. It's a tough one, right? Especially when you're dealing with social individuals who like being in an office together or like being in front of customers. It's a big change. And so not to underscore that too much, but it is going to be tough and it is going to be a change for everybody. What we've done and what we've seen working for other people is finding ways to stay connected and provide a routine for that day, so that it doesn't feel like you roll out of bed, you eat breakfast and then work, and then at some point that stops and you go back to bed and it's just the next day again, like Groundhog Day. And so establishing those morning routines, establishing those end of day routines help give people structure, help the team stay connected, get them in that pattern so they will do it and they don't just kind of self-isolate. That's been a big one that I've seen helping.
Nice. I love that, because your brain needs that sort of texture to the day. Mm-hmm. If it's stand up, go to your computer, go to bed, like you finish work, play video games, make dinner, etc., like whatever, or you're in front of your TV, you're not really moving around like physically. So having that, doing things to encourage exercise, massive. I don't know, like since the pandemic started, it feels like time accelerated and slowed mm-hmm. down at the same time.
Definitely. It's weird, eh?
Yeah. Super strange one. But you like trying to think back, like, oh, when did this happen? Was that last week? And somebody's like, no, it was 3 months ago. Like, I'm not going into the office, so there's no physical experience for your brain to attach to. And so I think that's one of the things that's been proven to aid in the recall is mm-hmm. the physical environment that you're in. So bit of a tangent there. I'm going to read one but we actually had this question from the team over at Close.io. They had asked a very similar question, and I pushed it to Julian, who's head of our Rev team. Mm-hmm. I think we call him Supreme Leader of the Rev team. Julian, maybe you can, I don't know where that came from. But basically, number one tip to keep sales rep engaged for Julian, it really comes down to empathy. But what I mean by that is it's never been more important to put yourself in the rep's shoes and determine how you can engage each individual uniquely. You can't have a blanket approach here, as what works for one team member might create the opposite behavior for another. That said, there are a couple things that I tend to focus on as table stakes in a remote culture. First, make sure you're over communicating on expectations and on the directional vision of the organization. Second, make sure you're available to your team. Don't push meetings. And FaceTime with each of your reps has never been more important and impactful. Love Julian. I think if I could pick what's his superpower, it's definitely the people side of things. If you were looking at like him as a superhero, definitely the people side. And the one thing that I'll add that I think he sort of highlighted is the writing it down. When he's talking about over communicating, it's not just talking to them. It's not just sending them messages on Slack. It's not just sharing in meetings. It's writing it down, getting it on paper or in a Google Doc where people can see it and live it, because it's got to be absolutely everywhere. We're not seeing each other. It's way too easy for something to get posted in Slack and get missed. Absolutely. So I'll throw it to chat. What's your number one tip to keep sort of remote sales teams more engaged? I would say, let me think on this one. So from my perspective, if I was building on what Julian had to say, I mean, I hear a lot of people talk about, and honestly, one of my biggest concerns with going to, and this is before we were working remotely, was like, well, if you're working from home, are people are they gonna show up? Right? Like, are they going to be on their computers? It wasn't a rational fear. It was one of those like irrational, like, well, the office keeps people, honest, because you can see when they show up and when they're not showing up. You can visually see that. And honestly, I think the working remotely has had the opposite effect, in that I see our team. Well, I can't physically see them, but I can see them in Slack and I can see them on Zoom and I can see it when they send me emails. hours when they should be not working and relaxing. We've had the opposite problem, is that people are actually spending more work or more time at the computer. I know for myself, I wake up, deal with the kids, come to my computer, and now I'm at work. And then when is it time to knock off? It's like when it's time to put the kids to bed. It's like, okay. Or like play with the kids, feed them dinner, put them to bed. And so it's the idea that the job expands to fit within the time allotted. And so like, I think your first piece was those bookends, right? And adding some texture to the week. If you don't have those bookends, then it's very easy for the job to expand into which the time you have available.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. All right, let me have a look here. So Sandra, what's something that you've been doing, or what's something that your team has been doing? And Caesar, let me know. Michael, let me know. What's something that your team has been doing to keep people engaged? What's some advice you'd have for Steve? I'm going to get us back to the agenda, but I'll definitely would love to come back to that. So as you type that out, I'll highlight it here. So we talked about sort of sales productivity. We talked about making sure that we're not overcomplicating things. When it comes to, when you say start selling, pretty obvious, right? We're not like get out of the tools, but why don't you talk to me about what you mean there?
You already said it really well. So when's the right time? It's now for prospecting. When's the right time for selling? It's now too, right? You need to start. We can all get in our heads and, we have to do, an extra hour of research, or we need to really know all these things before we get started. Well, you might do all that and then find it's not a fit right out the gate. So the best thing to do is to see it as a process and just start selling. Also, just from a practice perspective, I'm going to use the bike example again, Colin. The more you do it, the better you're going to get. Sales is no different. So that first call, you might over analyze it to death and wait and pause, but it's the 100th call that's going to be great, and the 500th call that's going to be awesome. And so the sooner you start, the sooner you get to 500.
Yeah. I think there's sort of, and I totally agree there. Like you got to start literally right now. Like if you should be prospecting right now, close YouTube, open up your sales engagement tool, and like go hammer out 50 activities. I won't be offended. I won't be sad. Cause like now is always the right time. I think there's sort of two ways that I would approach this. When I'm looking at like, how do we get going? And I think the first piece that that really helped me in the early days was the idea around sort of thinking through what is the final outcome? What is the change? What is the job to be done that the customer is struggling with, right? Like I think it was my mindset when I was making these calls that my goal was I'm picking up the phone and I'm going to try and convince somebody. I'm going to interrupt their day. I'm going to try and convince them to take some time so that I can sell them something, or somebody I work for can sell them something. And that was, accurate, but it's also a super negative mindset. And maybe not super negative, but it was framed in the way that I'm interrupting people, which is accurate, but sometimes you have to. And if you measure like, it's this much unhappiness, it's potentially generating like this much value for them, it's a blip on the road. So I had to reframe get into a new mindset, a new frame of mind around just my cold calling attitude. So I'm not interrupting their day. I am interrupting their day, but I accept that it's part of this grand formula to figure out, can we help them? Right. And I like to zoom in a little bit and think, okay, well, why am I going to make this call? Well, I'm going to make this call because I want to see if they're struggling with X, Y, Z. Okay, well, so what? Well, if they're struggling with X, Y, Z, well, then they might not be doing A, B, Z. And if they're not doing that, then that's probably going to it generally goes two different directions. They're either going to I'll be able to save them money, or I'll be able to make them money, right? You want that number in the bank account to go up generally. And there's two ways you can do that. I generally like to play to the make more money, because when you start a conversation with make more money, the only way you can do better is make more money. If you start a conversation with save you money, and I'm charging you for my software, well, then the only way I can save you more money is by charging you less for my software once you've achieved all that value. Now, that's kind of a bit of a fixed mindset, but sure. I think it holds. And so if we're reframing how we think about cold calling and in the call that I'm about to make, I find that was like one of those aha moments for me that made it's still not I wouldn't choose to cold call if I didn't have to work and I had like enough money to take care of the family and this and that. Cold calling would not be one of those things that I would choose to do. And I'm not sure. I know I have met people that just love that. I'm not one of them. But I think reframing it was super helpful in helping myself see the value. And then the second piece is, I think, to build on what you said, is the funnel math. Is just to understand, okay, I want to get, back in the day, you used to have to build a business plan. And I'm like, what the hell's a business plan? I'm in business school, but I'm also a sales rep. Like I'm not going to build like a SWOT analysis and this and that. And what they really meant was like, what's the funnel math? What is your plan? And it's because they want you to work out, well, I want to do this much in revenue. And in order to do this much in revenue, I need to have this many sort of opportunities, late stage opportunities in my pipeline. In order to get to this many late stage, I need to have this many initial conversations. And in order to have this many initial conversations, I need to do this much prospecting. And then you look at that and say, okay, well, if I need to do this much prospecting to get one, and I want to get 10 meetings or 10 closed sales in this period of time, then I need to do, X activities per day. And I just build it out that way. And then the one thing I do a little bit differently is instead of, and this is if I was measuring myself as an individual sales development rep or individual contributor in some way, is I break it out on a daily basis so that every day I start fresh. And I remember my coach, I had a hockey coach, because of course I had a hockey coach, because, stereotypical Canadian right here, eh? My hockey coach, Marty Brown, he always said, go out and win the period. Like the score doesn't matter. Just go win every shift, right? Mm-hmm. Just forget about the score. And I think that's the sort of same idea here, is we just want to go out and win every shift and every day, every hour. It's like, it doesn't matter what I did before. I accept what's in the past, and what's in the future is in the future. All I can control is right now, this next hour. I'm just going to go out, and I've got, my 50 calls or activities to do. I'm going to go and hit that right now.
Yep. Success builds on success. If you hit that right now, it adds up, right? God, Canadians are stereotypical. I played hockey as well.
What? No way.
I think I had a coach named Marty. Randy, not Marty.
Randy, yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty standard, Canadian names.
Yeah.
Awesome. So we're not going to talk about hockey or maple syrup, though.
Perfect.
We will after, like once YouTube goes away, we'll talk about the varieties of maple syrup that are most important to our day-to-day existence. But we've talked about, how you start selling and sort of the attitude and the mindset behind it.
Yep.
Talk to me about the process of sales productivity. We could call it sales enablement, sales operations, or I guess maybe I'll ask you, how do you, what's your definition for sales productivity?
Sales productivity overall is just making sure you're doing the right activities at the right scale to lead to success. It comes back to your funnel math. If you've figured out your path that gets you a win, you need to find a way to repeat that and do it enough times. So that productivity element is the doing of the successful process to get you the result that you're looking for. I wanted to go back to one thing that you said. So we were talking about that attitude going into a cold call. 100%, obviously that has a huge impact. What I've seen a lot is reps actually pausing before they even get to that point. So they spend way too much time in the database, cherry picking leads, trying to determine before they've even talked to the person if they're a good fit or not. If you have a team that does that for you and the list is there, trust it. Pick up the name, make the call, and then give feedback and do that enough times, and you'll give feedback and you'll be able to impact the list that way. It's really tough when you don't even get yourself to the call to make those calls. So I think I see people getting stuck before they even get to that point, Colin.
Totally. I've been there. You're staring at, I literally, when I was starting this company, this would have been like 8 years ago. I did cold calling for an investment banker, investment advisor. Like the guy made like $1 million a year, and he paid me $1,000 a month, which was a tremendous amount of money for me, but also like nothing for, what did he want? He wanted 10 meetings a month for $1,000 a month. I was like, that seems like, anyway, he literally gave me the business phone book for BC, and it was like this big, and it came with like a bookmark in it, and he's like, yeah, the last rep made it to L, so just start there. And like,
it's hilarious.
Oh man, yeah, that book, I had that book on my desk, and it would just thinking about the book just brings me like that resistance.
Yeah.
And I think there was a couple of pieces to it. It was like one, I was a little bit unhappy with the amount of value that he placed on what I was doing for him, right? So you've got some base level unhappiness there. You've got some. I had read predictable revenue. I'm like, hey, let me do all this email stuff for you. I literally have clients paying me to do this, and he refused. He's like, no, you can't. You have to cold call. And I was like, I literally just booked a meeting with like the VP at Walmart for this small startup using email. I was like, how can that? Anyway, so we had some disagreements there. And then and it was all these things that I was just like, I wasn't aligned. I wasn't in the right role. I wasn't in the right job. And I think making sure that you like your basic hierarchy of needs. And like, if you're feeling this resistance, is it because you don't believe in the product? And it's a terrible product, or you just don't understand the customer well enough? Because I think there probably is it's very unlikely. I shouldn't say very unlikely. The number of like truly terrible companies and products out there is very few. There are very few like companies that are out there to intentionally scam people. And so when I see most people unhappy with the product they sell or their customer base, it's usually like a misunderstanding. It's like they don't fully understand the customer and why they would pay for that. And if you don't understand that, it's really hard to get aligned. When I finally understood, oh, well, yeah, he makes $1 million a year because he makes his customers on average, X percentage points above the market, what you can make in the S&P. I was like, okay, well, I understand. Now on these cold calls, I'm not just making $1,000 a month to survive. Sidebar, I also refereed hockey. After this, I quit that job because it was taking up critical time, and I ended up refereeing hockey to make about the same amount, a couple nights a week, free exercise, getting paid to play hockey, a position that nobody wanted to play, but still, that's how I framed it up mentally. You can see I spin things very positively up here.
Yep.
Some would look at it as work. I'm like, I'm getting paid to play hockey. But when I finally had that realization of like, oh, I'm not just interrupting their day because I'm selfish and I want some commission. I'm interrupting their day because I can help them get, X, Y, better return on their money.
A house, a cottage, a car.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
You can upgrade that Porsche to a Maserati. It's like, that would
Going
be
the other way.
Porsche to Maserati. Yeah. Depends. I'm a big Porsche guy, but this isn't a Porsche conversation. I just thought like, what's potentially more valuable in the,
Yeah.
That's a great conversation to have, but probably for a different day.
Yeah.
Awesome. So Sandra was saying that, these days it's hard to cold call because you just know it's going to be hard to sell and convert them. And I think if you're, you might be right. I know Sandra, funny enough, Sandra sells coins. And it's a cool job. I hadn't thought that like somebody that does these coins, it would be like, somebody, that like marketing mail that you get when they're like, hey, here's a nickel, and like this could be going to a starving child in Africa or something like that. She's sending us some. I'd love that. I'd like some with Jay's face on them. If you could do that, that would be amazing. But like Sandra, like think of the impact. Yes, it's going to be a little bit harder, right? But for Sandra, you've got one of the coolest jobs because you're literally helping, like in a way, if by using this coin, you're decreasing the cost to your customers of sending that each individual mail, and they use that money to invest and send more of that mail, right? They're going to send 25% more mail, which means that 25% is going to come back and provide, X in additional sort of investments for charities. Like that's the ultimate value. Is like you're feeding kids in Africa, and like not many people can say that. This week is to laundromats to convert. Okay, so not starving children, not charities feeding starving children in Africa, but I do like that you're doing a vertical at a time. I do feel like we've got a little bit distracted though. So you were building on a piece before we jumped, something that I said just before we jumped into managing the process. So Jay, anything that you wanted to add or fill in there?
Yeah, I think there's a few questions that I generally ask myself when I'm looking at a team. And it's, are the leads sitting in buckets waiting for someone to do something? Meaning, are there a bunch of leads sitting there unactioned? Does the team cherry pick leads that they feel are most important or have the most potential? And is there a list of active leads or prospects who currently have no future action scheduled, no meeting, no upcoming event, no next step? And I use those to kind of get a feel for how systematic is this process? Do they know where they win, and are things moving through the process towards that successful outcome, or dropping out and getting out of people's way? So those are the three questions I like to take a look at, because it shows me if stuff is stuck, if people are being selective and maybe not in the right ways necessarily, or inconsistently, and just, what's sort of plugging up that process flow.
And I was kind of thinking about trying to transition this to the next piece, and I kind of missed those questions, but I do think it's an important piece. Can you repeat those questions? Mostly selfishly, so I can write them down. But I think it's an important element to highlight here.
Yeah. Are there leads just sitting in buckets waiting for someone to do something with them? Is the team cherry picking leads that they feel are most important or have that highest potential? And when we look at that lead list overall, how many don't have a future action? No meeting scheduled, no next step. And that allows us to see, is this actually a process, or is it kind of ad hoc? And could it be done better if we could identify what's successful and then make sure we had that throughput?
Totally. And I think that's a really great way, a really great thing to sort of ask yourselves, right? Like, I'm a huge fan of next steps, and a next action date. I think that's one of my favorite. I want to say it was Ryan Reisert that came on the podcast. Him and Rex did Cold Calling No Fluff. So if you're here last week, Rex is amazing. Him and Ryan started a company together. I had the pleasure of having both of them on the podcast, Rex a couple of times. And I remember Ryan's like bucket system for prospects, and just the, how he works his day heavily influenced in how we run our rev team, our sales, specifically our sales team. And like, Wade, if you're listening, do you remember that view that I created for you on your opportunities? That's from Ryan. Wade's one of our guys. And I'm big on like hotkeys and like helping yourself get a bit more efficient. I saw him doing something this a while ago, and I was like, hey, I could make your life a little bit easier. Let me show you. And it was very simple. Like, we have next step date, or next action date, and a next step field on every opportunity. And so when he was going through and sorting his pipeline, he was sorting by stage, and I'm like, no, that's wrong. Like, it's not that it's wrong. Like, it's one way to look at it. But if you're going to action, if you're there to like execute on your tasks and figure out what's next, start with stuff that's due today. Because if once you get beyond that, like there's stuff that's due a week ago, you're like, oh, well, I missed that. There's all these excuses that bubble up. But by starting your day by looking at what's due today, what's due tomorrow, what's the stuff I got to do this week, you start by the highest priority stuff, and you make sure that you're always getting that done. So I love the question, do you have prospects? Do you have opportunities? I would add, do you have opportunities without next steps? Because that's a big one for me.
For sure. I'm curious what led you to that insight around stages, because I find that's a common starting point for people, right? They think stages, that's my hot list. I'm going to go pick these people up. What allowed you to notice that maybe wasn't the most efficient starting point?
I mean, back in the day, so it's been I can't say there was one like aha moment. There have been like 30 aha moments. I've had the luxury of interviewing 160 sales leaders on the podcast and counting. And so one that I mentioned that heavily influenced me was Ryan. And that was the realization that, next step date, that was huge. And I want to say maybe Ryan was the bucketing system, and maybe it was Kent Vanook that actually talked. It was like episode 6 on the podcast. It's horrible production quality. Kent is amazing. I highly recommend following Kent. But he talked about sort of their sales force outreach pipeline. But that was kind of step 1, was like realizing that I didn't have this stuff documented. Then step 2 was realizing was Ryan Reisert's bucketing system. I can't remember what episode that was. And then the last big one that made me realize that everything I was doing was wrong, even with the next steps. It was like having 60% of a system. It was like having 60% of a car. You could sit in it and it goes places, but it doesn't really fulfill the vision of the car. It's a car without an engine, and you're sitting there and you can turn the steering wheel and you can push things and you can roll everything up and down, but you can't go anywhere. And I think the last piece was a conversation I had with Jamie Buss, and she's the VP of Sales over at Zendesk. And at the time, I think this is 2018, beginning of 2018, she was forecasting their pipeline within. They were doing $500 million annual revenue, and she was forecasting their quarters within 1%.
Crazy.
Bonkers. And the two things that I took out of that was like, one, customer verifiable outcomes on opportunity stages, right? And this can be translated to like any part of the sales process. It could be your prospecting process, but customer verifiable outcomes. And the best thing there is not just the fact that it's a customer verifiable outcome, but it's not really subjective. It's not something. It's like, have they done this? Have they not done this? You can, as a manager, you can verify it. The other piece that made that really valuable was the fact that we all finally agreed on what is the definition for this stage. Because, we had, 3 account execs or 4 account execs all working out of Salesforce, all using their pipeline differently. Even though we had definitions written down in the sales playbook that probably sat in Google Drive collecting dust. No matter, like, it doesn't matter that the definitions are there. It doesn't matter that it was written down. It matters that people use it. And it wasn't, and it wasn't translated in a way that everybody could use it. And so the pipeline, when I was trying to do call review or like deal review with a bunch of different reps, they were all, it was hard to see consistent trends because everybody's using their pipeline differently. And so that was one piece from Jamie. And that was kind of the first step, is like, you need to know where you're at on the map. And then you need to know sort of how much you know. You need that, like, so if I look at like the stages, it would be the sort of the loose, like if we're thinking about Google Maps and like the directions, it's the directional, like where you're going, right? And all the turn by turn directions. And then the next piece is the qualification framework. And that's what everything looks like. So instead of seeing the, just streets and houses and things, this is labels on the map. This is, oh, well, you're going to turn left on this street, you're going to turn right here, and there's a big house there, and et cetera, et cetera. You're going to go around the school, yada, yada, yada. The qualification framework adds that color, adds all the context. And what Jamie taught us was MedPick. And I won't go into all of it, but basically it was a way of understanding the, I'm going to say it the incorrect way, but basically how well your account exec had worked the opportunity, because it's how much information do you know? And so then you can layer that with like, where are we at from a sales perspective? Where are we at in the stage? Customer verifiable outcome. Have they said this yet specifically? Yes, they have. Okay, great. So we know we're here. And then the qualification framework provided, okay, well, this is how much we know about them. And so we can see if we have, like, if we're at a very late stage, but we haven't figured out who the economic buyer is, or like how they measure success, I know that's a garbage opportunity. I know that's like rose-colored glasses. But if they have all that, and it's like a 14 out of 14 or a 12 out of 14, and we're in late stages, it's not going to tell me that it's likely to close, but it gives me an indication of, we know the information, and we can sort of, we've done the best that we can. We've gathered all that we can. We know the right information. We've done the right things. Our team has followed the playbook, and the opportunity, there's a real opportunity there. It's not a guarantee to close, but it does give you a very strong indication of if you have, and this is what made it all come together for me. You know where you're at in the pipeline, stage-wise, customer verifiable outcome. You've mapped out all your qualification criteria, and you have next step documented and agreed upon with the client, and a next step date. And you've got that in your Salesforce. Like, those are the 3 big things that like really clicked for me, that suddenly I was like, oh, I see. I understand how I need to, not just as an AE, work my pipeline and sort it, but I understand the things that I need to be doing on the calls. And I understand if I'm having a conversation with a rep, this is where I need to direct my attention, because, oh, you're not covering this, or you're missing that. And it's like that moment in Twister, the movie, where they push the thing into the tornado, and now they can measure the speed and the velocity and the, all this and that. That was exactly it. It was those kind of 3 things coming together. I apologize for the rant. I'll pause and throw it back to Jay.
No, that was great. So that's something that I see with almost every team I take a look at. There's too much subjectivity in that process. The pipeline stages or other criteria are too much about the team and not enough about the person. The real question is, what are those agreements you've gotten, right? You called it customer verifiable outcome. I call it the customer agreement. What have they said they're going to do? Where are you at in the process? What have they agreed to keep doing with you? It makes a big difference. But then flipping that lens and looking at what's most important this week isn't necessarily about all the people who are in stage 5 of 5, because those aren't necessarily the ones you're going to close all the way, right? You want to look at what's most important today to keep advancing all those people through all the different stages all the time. Maybe my turn for a mini rant, but one of the biggest things I've seen with pipeline building is that roller coaster effect, right? So you prospect until you get enough people in the pipeline. People don't like prospecting, so they stop. They focus on moving those deals forward. Maybe some of them close, but eventually you get back down to 0 new people to talk to, and you start fresh and you do it again. And it creates this constant up and down in the revenue stream. By pivoting away from focusing on stages and targeting that way and focusing on what you need to get done, you keep a continuous pipeline built up. You always have more deals. One doesn't go through, moving on, next one from the pipeline, right? It's a lot easier and a lot better. And for me anyways, it feels a lot better as well while I'm doing it.
Totally. It's sort of, it's not quite, but it's sort of like the compound interest of activity, right? If you are consistent about putting, 50 activities into your pipeline every single day, or 150, or however many you need to do every week, depending on the sort of, I would call it the style, whether you're optimizing for market coverage or conversion, right? So like whatever your number is, if you're consistently hitting that number, you're increasing the likelihood that you're going to have a really good outcome. And
Definitely.
love the way you're thinking about that there.
Yeah, it helps a lot too. Trying to get those systems organized at scale is always interesting. I first got into this stuff when I was a product manager at McKenzie Investments, and we were selling products to brokers like the one you were working with, Colin, and trying to get our sales reps to talk to those brokers about new products was tough because they always felt strapped for time. But what we found was, once we gave them some repeatable process, some easy things to look at, we showed them where that value was, like how you reframed the appointment setting process. It can really drive a lot. And when you find those best practices, you don't want to just leave them the chance or say, oh, good, we got here. You want to document them. You want to train on them. You want to spread them through your team, because it is going to help quite a bit.
100%. Yeah. It's helping them see the other side of it is so important.
Definitely.
Yeah. And it's, I think to your point, I think what you're alluding to is like, it's impossible to help somebody else see the other side if you don't see the other side yourself.
Yeah.
Amazing. I know, chat, we've kind of ranted a little bit. Your term, jump in. What's some of your sort of favorite, I guess, ways to just put rubber to the road? Like when you're stuck in a lull, Sandra, you're sitting, going, I don't want to call these laundromats. How do you get yourself going? And we're going to talk about, we're going to just change gears and talk about specialization for a little bit here. Cause I think, there's I made a comment about sort of inbound versus outbound, and it's really challenging to do both because you've got that sort of constant trickle of meetings coming in or people coming in to talk to. I'd argue that, and I think this is probably the direction you're going, but I guess maybe I'll ask, how do you see that similar as a reason to specialize inbound and outbound? And how do you see that impacting account executives that also have to close?
It can definitely have a major impact. I've seen lots of different solutions work. That's why I'm hesitating a bit. Before Basix, I worked for Royal Bank. The Canadians will know that name. Some of the Americans might not. And there was 27,000 salespeople at this company. So a lot of different salespeople. There's 5 or 6 different divisions. There's 37 different roles. And when you start digging into those systems, you have to really look at what causes success in this process. What are the different activities, and can I find them in one person, or can I find them better in multiple people? And tends to be the way I look at it. If I can find a better fit for people, and they can accomplish that task better, like appointment setting. They're really good at that intro, creating excitement, getting someone engaged, kind of going from 0 to 1 and getting that appointment teed up. That might be a completely different person than the next person who's going to close that sale, who's going to bring insights and build that relationship and get the deal done. So I don't look at it necessarily as inbound versus outbound, or inside or outside or any of those pre-built distinctions. I like to look at what does it take to be successful, and can I find that in one person, or can I find it in a better way in multiple different people?
Right on. Yeah, I mean, I think we'll probably take a contrary view just because, just because. I'm not a fan of like mixing inbound and outbound. I'm
Mm-hmm.
also not a fan of mixing prospecting and accounting, like in closing.
Yep.
I think it's the number one thing that most companies still do that just doesn't make any sense to me. You know,
Yep.
you've got these. So let's pretend that we're managing a factory, right? And let's say
Mm-hmm.
we've got $1,000 CNC machines, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
call them $1 million CNC machines, and then you've got, these, and the CNC machine has a capacity of, call it 10 units, and in order to create those 10 units, it needs to have, say, 100 units of raw material that's in a certain way. So you need to plane the wood, or you need to get the wood in a certain shape. And there's a
Mm-hmm.
different, and the CNC machine can plane the wood and can straighten it out. But if it's doing that, it maxes out at about 4 units a month. But if you were to, say, buy this other machine that you would pay $200,000 for, that could straighten that out, well, then all of a sudden, if you've got two of those feeding this $1 million machine, now you've got, two of those that you spent, $400,000 on total, but you're getting, double or triple the output off of this $1 million machine, right? So to me, that's an amazing investment, right? And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's the argument for sales development reps. And I
Definitely.
think especially when you look at your top reps, it's not like you're doubling their efficiency. You're 5xing or 10xing their efficiency. You take those people that are just absolute killers that
Yeah.
close so many deals, and you take the hardest, most variable part of their job off
Yep.
their plate, and you give it to somebody else. And I think that's where you can like really really make magic. And if you look at, one of the most valuable, most exciting companies in the world, Snowflake, they're gonna have, in the next 6 months, they're gonna have the largest sales development team in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Not a coincidence.
For sure. Um, the angle for looking at it, I find, just helps people to reduce some of their preconceived notions when they come to the table. Working with sales teams or working with sales leaders, I find there's a lot of resistance to sometimes breaking up those sales roles, especially if it's working okay. They don't have a burning need to change. So why would I take my generalist salesperson here and split that up into multiple jobs? And if you can get them to really think through the different parts, like you did with the factory example, you can help them to see for themselves how that's different and how they'll get 1 + 1 = 3, to use a cheesy saying, out of that breakup. But you really will, right? You'll be super surprised when you specialize sales roles, how you awaken sort of energy in reps too, because they see how to win and they'll do it, and they can focus on just winning at that. And I find a lot of salespeople take a lot of pride out of those outcomes, right?
Totally. I will say there is a counter argument to what I'm saying, and that's when it comes down to the cost to acquire a customer. If
Mm-hmm.
you are, this model breaks down when you have a lower cost to acquire a customer, because from a
Definitely.
process perspective, you're adding a bit more complexity to the throughput, right? It's going to take
Yep.
more time to get one unit from one side to the other.
Yep.
Sandra's just saying she realized she needs a better tool for her SDR job to be more productive. I think you need to have a conversation with Jay. Shameless plug.
Thanks, Colin.
Jay can help you out there. The one
Definitely.
and we can give you some info at the sort of as we wrap. I want to get this idea out before I forget it. But basically, at lower cost, at lower value products, there are in like shorter sales cycles. Like if you're a 1 or 2 call close, adding a sales development team is actually going to elongate your process, and it might actually lower your conversion rate, even though your AEs are having more conversations. You might be seeing, if the customers are expecting to buy in that first call or in the first 2 calls, there's probably just too much complexity, and you're not going to get a big enough ROI on adding a sales development team in. Any thoughts on what that number is? I've got some ideas myself, but have you seen this, Jay? Do you agree, disagree?
Agreed. You might even see drop off, right? Not just elongating of the process. I think the number varies, but if I had to put a number on the wall, I'd say probably 5 or 10%. I've seen one team where it was up to 20% almost, just because they had too many pieces.
Yeah. And in terms of if somebody's listening and they're like, oh, well, I'm selling a $10,000 product, Am I going to get value out of a sales development team, or is that sort of borderline in your opinion?
Um, I would still want to know a little bit more personally just about that sales process and what that looked like.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen, different fits, and sometimes you can say a small business sale might only need one rep, but I don't know if one shoe fits all sizes, right? Like,
That's totally fair. And especially
yeah,
if you're like in that zero to, I don't know, $0 to $1 million range where you're in that like do things that don't scale. If you're a founder, do whatever you need to do, right? Like,
definitely.
I was talking to, actually, so funny enough, I was talking to Lars, who's head of sales, global sales development at Snowflake. So if you haven't heard
Mm-hmm.
Snowflake, they're in the news. They're like one of the large, fastest growing tech companies in Silicon Valley or something like that. Anyway, I was talking with him about like what's your playbook for founders, and it's basically like founder-led selling, and then the first people you hire are sales development reps so that you can get more. But again, that first couple $100,000 in annual recurring revenue is going to be you. Then you add some
Yep.
sales development reps. Then you add sort of a closer that can eventually be a manager, and blah blah blah. Blah. Bob's your uncle. So it's like that's a general playbook. Again, it's not going to be certainly not what we followed. I hung on to things for way too long, didn't get enough support in the early days because sales was my thing. And I was like, I can do this, so why would I get somebody else to do it? And it's like, oh, because you're supposed to be doing the CEO job, which you could argue I did poorly in the early days. Joe Girard is saying Basix rocks. And he spelt it. Oh, I thought he spelt it with an X, but because Basix is
That's
spelled
right.
with an X.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So that was the sort of rant on like early sales. I think if we close this out on like, if I close this sort of loop, I would say sort of to look at like if you're selling something that's $1,000 a year, you're definitely not going to get value out of a sales development team. It's going to extend at the $10,000 mark. It's a maybe. So in that 1 to 10,000 range is maybe an opportunity to say, okay, well, is this something that's going to be valuable for me? As you get higher up, you're going to get more and more and more out of an investment like that. Caesar's saying, I think it depends on the company's marketing operations setup. Lower value can be worked by BDRs placed into nurture stream. Yeah, you're totally right. Especially if you're getting, like you said, it sounds like Caesar's getting a ton of inbounds. So if you're getting tons and tons and tons of inbounds, then getting somebody in to handle those early can definitely be helpful, even at a lower range. My question would be like, could your inbound guys inbound team get proficient enough to eventually start closing some of the little ones? I've seen this at a number of companies where if it's under, a certain number of seats or a certain number of, the deal's worth like under a certain amount, then the SDRs can close it themselves. And if it's over a certain amount, then they got to hand it off.
That works.
Awesome. So chat, I want to leave some time for Q&A. We got one more piece here, just about sales conversations, but any final questions for Jay? We're probably going to wrap this up in the next, 5-10 minutes here. So if you got any last questions that we can help with, or if there's something that Joe is now spelling at rocks, Basix rocks with an X. So he's on brand. And yeah, so if there's anything that we can help with, if you want to pick Jay's brain, if you want me to shut the hell up for a bit, throw your questions in chat. But while I'm waiting for you to get back to me, Jay, talk to me about what you mean by sales conversations. Sales are conversations with prospects.
For sure. So it's about getting stuff out of the way, right? When you equip your salespeople with tools that reduce complexity, processes that help them to achieve their goals, roles that take advantage of unique skill sets, like we were just talking about, and are the right fit for your process, it really allows them to just focus on selling, which ultimately means putting themselves in more conversations. And so for me, ultimately, that's my goal for my salespeople. I want them spending as much of their day in conversations with potential customers as possible, and as little of their day doing anything else. What we've seen in terms of impacts, newer salespeople scale up faster. They get more comfortable with the pitch. They understand the product or service better. They get better at talking to people. They just get more polished through that practice. The bulk of your sales force is just also going to see that lift because they're spending more time refining their skills, and just a numbers game, getting out there and having more conversations. And when you really take away all those blockers from your really great reps, you'll be amazed what they can pull off. Mm-hmm. Just like get that salesperson who just loves closing people to just stand there and have people brought up in front of them, and they're going to do an awesome job.
It is really awesome to see. And it takes work and it takes time, and there's so much that goes into it. But being able to watch a team just like hit their stride, and everybody knows their role, and they're comfortable and they're hitting consistently. It's really a beautiful thing. And you can look at like your pipeline efficiency, I guess, is one way to think about like the overall sort of score or grade you're getting for your team. And if you're not doing some of these things, you're going to be stuck down at like 20%. And so basically you take all your efforts and you multiply them by 20, and that's the output you're going to get. But if you do all these things right, you can be up to like 80, 90, percent. And this is some like mythical formula that I have, but it illustrates the idea that, some very, very simple tweaks can be can have a massive impact on your customers, on your team, and the overall results that you're going to get.
For small teams and big teams, right? First year I was at the bank, I was employee number 2 on the incentive and performance team. And we made some changes to solve for some distribution problems. And those employees put a 36% lift on the table for the bank that year in 1 year. Sales force of over 6,000 people. So even on big teams, you can make big impacts. You can have things that will help drive those bigger results for them. And if you really align with your sales reps and make them feel successful for those changes you're asking of them, they'll do them for you and they'll deliver over what you thought.
Amazing. I really appreciate you taking some time to hang out with us and answer questions and chat. Appreciate you coming and showing up every week. It's always great to get a chance to have a chat with you through the chat and answer your questions and help you work on your challenges. I want to create some space for Jay to talk to us a little bit about Basix. On the podcast, I would do like a cold call role play, just because I don't like that whole marketing, like, okay, I'm going to switch gears. I'm going to talk for 7 minutes straight about my product. But I don't want to surprise you here. Everybody's saying thank you. They appreciate you coming on. But can you give us, if somebody's looking for, X, they'll get Y value out of Basix.
For sure. So a lot of what we talked about today is the inspiration behind Basix. I've spoken a little bit about my time with the bank. I spent a lot of time working with tons of different sales teams and really trying to figure out what helps them set them up for success and also set their business up for success. And so Basix, it's a sales execution platform. It puts all the salesperson's tools in one place so they can get the job done. Phone, email, calendar, everything's built in, pipeline tracking's built in. Colin, harkens back a bit to what you were talking about with your product. Obviously outreach and sales love have those boxes checked off as well. But what we do differently is beyond that. So we help to segment decisions out so that your company loads your contact database and hooks up your marketing leads into Basix. Your managers work with people, get them assigned to different pieces of work, whether it's clients, if you're an agency, or territories, if you're a company. And then Basix actually feeds leads one person at a time to the sales team so that they can have the right person at the right time to close that deal. And the salespeople decide what they're doing with each person. So they'll reach out, make contact, set a disposition if it makes sense, set a next step if that conversation is continuing, and move on. And so through that process, we build the best practices right into the tool. We eliminate a lot of the admin work, and we just help the sales team focus on conversations. Ultimately, because it's a system and it's all connected, the whole company benefits from best practice, who's working, narrowing that ICP target, just helping everyone win.
Right on. Jay, thanks so much for coming on the show. It sounds really cool. I'm going to check it out myself. I like the way that you sort of include all the pipes and not just the tool. It's all the pipes to get the value out of it. Because so much of getting either the tools you mentioned sort of set up takes work, takes a sales ops person. And so if you can have that all, rigged up in one tool, I can see a tremendous amount of value there. Sandra mentioned that she's looking for a new tool. Maybe we can point her in the direction of Basix with an X.ai. I think the team's down there, or your team's in chat, so feel free to post a couple links so people can know where to follow up and follow through. And speaking of sort of shameless plugs, we've got our sales productivity community. We've got our sales community in Slack. So if you want to continue the conversation with any of the speakers, anybody we have on, myself, or any of the other people in chat, we've got a lot of great knowledgeable salespeople that hang out in the community, and we're really investing there. So if you want to continue the conversation, Mero or Julia are going to throw a link in the chat, and you can join us there and keep the conversation alive. But until next week, it's been great hanging out, and we'll see you next week. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Colin. Thanks everyone.
Jay. Oh yeah, and if you're hanging out, don't forget to subscribe. Click that little subscribe button, and
For sure.
and if we earned a thumbs up, give me that thumbs up.